What can you say about Danganronpa? Originally released in 2010 as a visual novel, it's evolved into a massive franchise. One with not only an expansive cast and setting, but an ever-expanding number of fan games and quasi-sequels. If you're watching this, chances are you're pretty familiar with DR. Now, there are plenty of video essays and discussion threads and whole series breaking down things like the story, the killing games, the timeline, individual characters, motives, executions, etc. But I've yet to see anyone discuss another big question. How did we even get here? Contrary to many people's expectations, the actual setting of Danganronpa is neither vaguely defined, nor is it just window dressing or a backdrop to the killing games. In fact, not only is it rich with lore, I would argue it's crucial to understanding the franchise's actual themes and how everything comes together. Because why is it that these games even took place the way they did? How does it all fit together? What happened for us to even get to this point? What was up with that ghost? All these questions and more we'll be answering here. We'll be taking a look at the good, the bad, and the really, really weird world building of Danganronpa. For this video, I'm going to be laying down some ground rules. 1. I'm going to be sticking to what I call the Hope's Peak saga only. This means I'm going to be excluding V3 from this deep dive. While there are references to the main series in it, its connection to canon is nebulous at best. 2nd, I'm going to be including information provided by the spin-offs, including Killer Killer and the Byakuya and Kyoko novels. Don't take my word on them as canon to be law, but if there's anything in them that references or expands on information provided in the Hope's Peak saga, I'll mention it here. 3. There are going to be obvious contradictions here and there, particularly with the retcons in Danganronpa 3. However, I'm going to share the information provided in both the games and the anime, that way we all get a complete picture. Sure, it may be contradictory, but it's still worth discussing. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Hope's Peak Academy, the centerpiece for the first game, and the facility whose shadow looms heavily over the rest of the franchise. If there's any place to start, it's here. We're given fairly succinct descriptions of the school from both Makoto and Hajime in their respective intros. Hope's Peak is the most prestigious school in Japan, quite possibly the entire world. While it's not a private academy, as it receives funding directly from the government, nobody can just apply for membership. To attend Hope's Peak Academy, you have to meet 2 requirements. You have to already be attending high school, and you have to be the top of your field. Even then, the school has to scout you first to consider you viable, and only then will you receive a letter offering you the chance to attend. And considering that if you graduate from Hope's Peak, you're basically set for life, most everyone accepts. Once you're admitted, you're classified as an ultimate student and given an appropriate title. It may not fit your entire body of work or your ambitions, but you'll have that bit of branding that guarantees you notoriety. It's such a big deal that online forums exist discussing current and future ultimates. Now, because of these strict requirements, Hope's Peak classes tend to be fairly small, with only about 15 to 16 admitted per year. This means that if we take 2nd and 3rd years into consideration, the main course has about 40 to 58 ultimate students at any given time. Pretty exclusive. But there are 2 other ways to attend Hope's Peak as well. The first is the nationwide lottery. See, it isn't just about athletes or academics that the school is interested in. Every year, a lottery is held, where the name of a random high schooler is drawn and given the opportunity to attend as the ultimate lucky student. All this you probably knew if you played the first game, but there's so much more to get into. As explained in the prequel novel Danganronpa 0, Hope's Peak is divided into 4 quarters, each roughly the size of a regular high school, with a plaza at its center. The North Quarter houses the most recognizable part of the school, which is later referred to as the Old Building. It's a 5-story structure home to dorms, multiple classrooms, a library, a kitchen, a swimming pool, a trash room, a greenhouse, and even a bathhouse with a sauna. This is where the first game takes place. The reason it's called the Old Building is because it was decommissioned and left empty for quite a while. That brings us to the East Quarter, which is where a whole new school building and a series of facilities were established. This includes a faculty building and entire research labs devoted to biology, literature, health, physics, math, PE, linguistics, art, etc. You may be wondering why they closed down the original building and decided to build a whole new one. We'll come back to that. The South Quarter houses the main course's dormitories and amenities like a convenience store and a bookstore. And then there's the West Quarter, home to the 3rd way to attend Hope's Peak, the Reserve Course. This place functioned more like a traditional high school, where students hoping to attend had to take an exam and pay a massive fee. While the main course had less than 50 students at any given time, the Reserve Course housed well over 2,300 at its height. All of them were ordinary high schoolers who, in theory, could now put Hope's Peak on their resume and guarantee their success in life. In practice, however, the Reserve Corps students were treated like second class by the school. While Ultimate students could visit their side, Reserve Corps students were strictly forbidden from entering the other quarters. It was essentially normal high school, without any of the real benefits or prestige associated with Hope's Peak. Of the staff, we know of a few members. Chisa Yukizome, who served as a teacher following her graduation, Koichi Kizakura, a teacher and a talent scout, Juzo Sakakura, the head of security and Chisa's old classmate, and an unnamed PE teacher. Aside from them, we get a sense that the school has a staff of a few hundred at least. Danganronpa Zero mentions that Meeting Room 13, the largest in the faculty building, can house over 300 people at any given time. The school is officially run by a headmaster, two of whom we know by name, Kazuo Tengen and Jin Kirigiri. However, the headmaster is basically just a figurehead, as the real power in the school lies in the hands of a group known as the Steering Committee. But we'll come back to them as well. There also existed an elementary division, specifically devoted to gifted children or Little Ultimates. While comparatively little is known about it, a collectible in Ultra Despair Girls clarifies that being accepted here doesn't guarantee one a place in Hope's Peak itself. You still have to be scouted. The elementary actually uses an entrance exam and an interview section, which suggests that this was the basis for the reserve course, given the elementary was highly successful. The only students we know of who attended the elementary were the Warriors of Hope, a group of children who all faced serious domestic abuse and were considered troublemakers. Just before things took a turn for the worse, there was also going to be an overseas branch of the school. Where exactly this was meant to be is unclear, but it was located on an island. And that's a very general sense of our school. But how old is it? See, an odd detail in the first game is that Makoto says the school has hundreds of years of tradition, but it's established that he was part of the 78th class. This could just be a case of early installment weirdness, so I don't consider it too much of a big problem. However, him being part of the 78th class leads to another question. When does Danganronpa take place? See, there's only one established date in the entire franchise, visible on the orientation guide Makoto receives. The thing is, this date depends on what version of the game you're actually playing. The original was in 2010, while the Anniversary Edition updates this to 2014. We'll go with the reasonable answer and simply say, based on these dates and the class numbers we know of, that Hope's Peak was started around 1932 to 1936. We also know it was founded by a man by the name of Izuru Kamakura, whose goal was cultivating personal talent to create hope for those in and outside the school. This is a very interesting period to have as the original time frame. The world was still in the grip of the Great Depression, President FDR began implementing his New Deal, the Soviet Union was putting its second five-year plan into practice, and Germany was implementing its earliest Nuremberg laws, legitimizing racial and anti-Semitic discrimination. As for Japan, well, this was right between the invasion of Manchuria and the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. At this time, early in the years of the Showa period, Japan experienced a massive increase in industrial and military power, as well as a burgeoning democratic movement. The Taisho democracy, which lasted from 1905 to 1932, saw a massive push for greater political participation, a rise in political parties, and significant labor and social movements. However, this era was also largely steeped in eugenics and social Darwinism. These ideas were certainly not unique to Japan, nor the other fascist states of the era, but were popular all over the place. This idea of improving the human gene pool by encouraging the talented and intelligent to breed, while discouraging or even denying that to ethnic minorities, people with mental or physical disabilities, or anyone who was just seen as unfit. In Japan, journalist Ikeda Shigenori started a pro-eugenics magazine in 1926. He also promoted establishing December 21st as Blood Purity Day, or Junketsu Day. The Japanese Society of Health and Human Ecology was established in 1930, and appointed Hisomu Nagai as its Doctor of Eugenics, a man who was strongly pro-sterilization. The early 1930s even saw questionnaires for married couples being printed in magazines, devoted to figuring out how fit they were, and to help prevent members of different social classes from intermingling. So why did I spend that whole segment talking about eugenics? Well, because it's impossible to talk about Hope's Peak and not mention things like this.
People with talent don't become talented. They're just born with their abilities right from the start.
Or this.
You might think there are no ultimates and commons in a class like homeroom, but there are.
Or this.
才能のない人間たちはダニのようなものです。才能ある者たちの血を吸って肥え太り、ひたすら増えるだけの。
These statements underline the most insidious aspect of Hope's Peak. As a government-funded school established in the 1930s, Hope's Peak's origins would have been steeped in these eugenicist views. and it seems that never went away. They just changed form, becoming the social stratification between the talented and common people, not just devaluing the latter, but outright comparing them to parasites. The reserve course only exists to serve as a monetary resource, yet the people in charge despise them for it. But what was it like attending the main course? Surely if Hope's Peak only places value and emphasis on talent, then it must be awesome being an ultimate student, right? Well, in a way, yes. You're almost bound to be guaranteed success in life, like grant money, prestige, all that good stuff. But at the same time, you probably won't learn anything. And that's because class attendance in the main course is totally optional. What they actually encourage is for ultimate students to focus strictly on their talents, whatever that might be. No academic routines or tests, no classes to help teach them important life skills, and students are even allowed to waste away in their dorms if it means they're focused on what they're good at. The only real tests we see are the practical exams, where they have to demonstrate their talent, not just to a private panel of the school's judges, but to dignitaries and even a whole media circus. If you're an ultimate, you're not just told that you're going to be the future hope of the nation, but any mistake you make is going to be put on full display for the nation and the world to see. And if you fail, you can say goodbye to all those benefits that come with being talented. And even as an ultimate, you as an individual don't matter. Your worth is only defined by what you're good at, with no real regard for anything else. Ultimate students are basically circus animals. And that's exactly how the school prefers it. Because while the school may pride itself on fostering talent, none of this is because they help people succeed. It's because they have their own ambitions. As I mentioned before, the true power behind Hope's Peak is a group called the Steering Committee. They're a collection of 4 unnamed old men, all described as deeply arrogant and greedy. They look down on everyone else, even people who they need help from. While not much else is said about them as people, their actions define the trajectory of the school. Most of what we know about them comes from Danganronpa 0, where it's made clear that they were the ones who chose to open up the reserve course, bringing in a new stream of revenue and allowing for them to massively expand the school in less than 2 years. What they care about most is the school's image and prestige, to the point that even though he holds very little actual power, they will shift responsibility and blame for anything that goes wrong onto the headmaster. They also had the authority to completely overrule the decisions made by the headmaster and the other staff, and to make choices for the school without their say. But above all, what they value most is talent. Talent is the only thing that matters, regardless of what form it takes, while common people are just a resource to utilize. To them, ensuring Hope's Peak remains a functioning institution devoted to fostering the hope for humanity takes priority above all else. This even includes crime. In case a murder happens on school grounds, they'll make up a cover story and wash their hands of it completely. They also have no problem admitting criminals, or people whose talents would otherwise be considered illegal as ultimates. I've seen a lot of speculation in the fandom that this lets them pretend that they're rehabilitating, quote, troubled youths, and I could see that being the case. A notable example is Twilight Syndrome murder case, where Natsumi Kuzuryu was murdered in the school's music room, and the whole incident was blamed on a pervert, as someone's swimsuit also went missing around that time. The killer was, however, a girl named Sato, a friend of Mahiro Koizumi, both of whom were victims of Natsumi's bullying. Sato convinced Mahiro to help her bury the evidence, but Natsumi's brother and Mahiro's classmate Fuyuhiko learned the truth and later killed Sato with a baseball bat. All of this would be covered up by the school. All those involved, including several members of Class 77, weren't allowed to say anything. But you may be wondering why? Why go to all this trouble for the sake of a nebulous concept like talent? Well, you remember when I said their goal is fostering humanity's hope? To them, ensuring Hope's Peak remains a functioning institution devoted to fostering the hope for humanity takes priority above all else. That had a double meaning to it. As I said, both Ultimates and Reserve Corps students don't matter as individuals. Hope's Peak is a laboratory, one where the steering committee and their fellow researchers can study the talents of the Ultimates, and not only have all the money they could ever need to finance the school, but to also finance their secret pet project, and that was the Hope Cultivation Plant, also known as the Izuru Kamakura Project. The greatest ambition of the steering committee was to create a person who could embody every talent and skill known to mankind, the power to do literally anything, at the greatest level of aptitude. In their mind, someone like this would have both the knowledge and the capability to solve the world's problems. They would become mankind's ultimate hope. But to achieve this, everything that person once was would have to go. They would have to suppress or remove every thought, emotion, hobby, memory, and personality trait that would interfere with acquiring talent. A process that would require extensive brain surgery and reprogramming before they had their Superman. They wouldn't just need someone without a talent. They would need someone with a desire for one, and the will to agree to something like this. That was the secondary purpose of the reserve course, a perfect source for potential candidates, and they eventually found one, a young man by the name of Hajime Hinata. By exploiting his insecurities and his admiration for Hope's Peak, they were able to convince him to agree to the project, and they transformed him into their ultimate hope, renaming him Izuru Kamakura. But while they succeeded in granting him both the knowledge and the capability, what they failed to give him was the will. With all the power in the world, but all of his connections to humanity suppressed, Izuru had no drive and no ambition. He also shared the committee's own disgust for talented people, also comparing them to ticks, and he even felt their existence had brought the world to a deadlock. Ultimately, with superhuman analytical abilities, he found the world easily predictable. He even realized that he was being exploited by the committee, but had no motivation to change it. No matter how much he tried to free himself from the boredom, anything unpredictable was stimulating for a moment, then quickly became tiring. He wanted to find a way to free himself from his eternal boredom, and this would lead to the beginning of the end. See, the steering committee had decided to admit two other people to Hope's Peak, one of them being someone with a similar talent, someone whose talent, while not officially recognized by the school, lay in that same field of analytical understanding, that person being Junko Enoshima and her sister Mukuro. Now, say what you will about her as a villain, but Junko had plenty to work with when it came to Hope's Peak's corruption, exploitation, and immorality. After their admission as members of the 78th class, Junko and Mukuro first tried to kill Izuru, but this ended very quickly. So instead, Junko decided to offer him a source of unpredictability, just to get a taste of what her worldview was like. This is what led to the tragedy of Hope's Peak, aka the Student Council killing game. Shown in Despair Side and serving as a major driving force in DR0, Junko brought together a group of Hope's Peak Student Council members and essentially forced them to kill each other, providing them with weapons, motives, and a very unsettling performance by Mukuro as a backdrop. Also, Izuru could watch. Ultimately, 13 people were killed that night, with just one survivor, Ultimate Student Council President Soshun Murasame, later being strangled to death by Junko's childhood friend, Yasuke Matsuda. And afterward, the steering committee decided to not only seal off the crime scene, but to move everything into a new building and shut off the old one. Not only that, but they then manufactured a cover story, saying that all the students who disappeared had actually been chosen for the new overseas branch. Which means that not only was the steering committee already considering opening up the school beyond Japan, they used the tragedy of Hope's Peak as the impetus to do so. Or at least they planned to. Of course, all of this was for nothing. Junko leaked the truth about the events to the reserve course, and let them see just how little the school thought of them. They began a protest against the main course, which the steering committee, in another attempt to save face and downplay the issue, dubbed the Parade. Now, we're going to zoom out a bit and take a look at some of the other players in this world. But first, another bit of history. Even with Hope's Peak's presence, some things have changed while others have stayed the same. For one, as Sonia notes in her Free Time events, Japan still experienced the same economic downturn in the 1990s, which means its post-war history here had to be largely the same as in our world. Yes, this is important, stick with me here. As a brief summary, Japan's economy didn't just grow rapidly after World War II, it blew up. Because America invested such a great deal into rebuilding Japan's infrastructure and providing them with military defense, as well as modern factories and efficient manufacturing techniques, this allowed the Japanese government to pour money into public works, education, healthcare, and government subsidization of businesses. This created a close bond between both the government and various corporations, a term we now call crony capitalism. While this did allow Japan's economy to explode in the 70s and 80s, to the point where the Imperial Palace was valued at more than all the real estate in California combined, it was built on a facade. Contrary to the view that Japan was destined to economically dominate the future, the country was in the midst of an economic bubble, which would burst around the start of the 90s. While we don't have many details on the politics of Japan in this setting, we do know of at least one prime minister, Toranosuke Ishimaru, grandfather of Kiyotaka from the first game. He was the former Ultimate Manager and was considered a genius by his peers, which allowed him to make it into public office. However, after just a few months, a massive series of scandals forced him to step down, leaving his family with crippling debt and public shame. Because of all this, Taka himself had come to hate the term genius, and applied himself through sheer hard work and determination to get to where he is. He had an ambitious goal of one day becoming prime minister himself to make up for the damage his grandfather caused. I didn't notice this until I started writing the script, but if you look, there's a lot of emphasis placed on wealthy families and organizations in these games, and very few are shown in a positive light. The first and most well-known is the Togami Corporation, owned and run by the Togami family. Now, we don't learn much about the corporation itself, but Byakuya is allowed to buy and trade on the stock market even though he's a teenager, and he believes it's his family's destiny to rule the world. So we can get a pretty good idea of how powerful they are. As we also learn from Byakuya, their system of inheritance is very unconventional. See, rather than taking a wife, the head of the family couples with exceptional women around the world. Then when the time comes, their children are all forced to compete against each other until only one is left standing. The winner is guaranteed the privilege of becoming the next head of the family, and the rest are considered dead to the name, unworthy of even having the name Togami, and are forced to become part of the 99% as Byakuya describes. Another company, one we learn much more about, is the Toa conglomerate. According to collectibles found in Ultra Despair Girls, their history began 200 years ago with a small factory called Toa Ironworks, run by Tokushige Toa. His company eventually dominated 70% of the iron manufacturing market in Japan at the time, and between age 30 and his death at 64, Tokushige founded a new business once every 20 days on average. According to his wife, his motivation was the prosperity of mankind. For the record, this would be over 600 businesses in his time. Quite accomplished. And in time, Toa Group built their own city on an artificial island, called, what else, Toa City. Originally just a place for their headquarters, it eventually grew into a whole metropolis, complete with apartments, hotels, factories, shopping districts, a public hall, a police station, trains, a shrine, and even a massive underground sewer system. Functionally, it was a corporatocracy, where the Toas owned everything, and even dispensed propaganda to the populace. Without any political experience whatsoever, the head of the company, Tokuichi Toa, was the de facto mayor. While we don't know much about him directly, we do know he had 2 children, Haiji, who was presumably the result of an off-screen marriage, and Monika, his illegitimate child from a mistress. While he only initially allowed his mistress to have Monika if she'd raise her, she dumped her onto her father and left. Tokuichi and Haiji were always very cold to Monika, treating her like an alien in their own home. She was also physically abused often enough and severely enough that she could convincingly pretend to be physically disabled, which, yikes. And while this did get her father and brother to feel some sympathy for her, what they were most interested in was her intelligence. See, despite her age, Monika had a proficiency in engineering, to the point where Tokuichi made her the chief executive of the Toa Group's robotics branch, which actually put her above Haiji, which he was not happy about. Despite being in his 20s, Haiji never grew out of being an entitled, spoiled brat. Meanwhile, Monika, after a childhood full of neglect, abuse, and abandonment, began to feel manipulation was the only way for her to survive. She was never taught compassion and had no grasp of healthy social interactions. Even her father, while he gave her a job, was only using her for Toa Group's benefit, something that would come back to bite him in the end. Beyond these 2 groups, others are mentioned in passing. Another is TAT Television, the biggest broadcasting network in the country. Its lead director is the father of Kanon Nakajima, Leon Kawada's cousin. Thanks to her dad's position, as she says, she's rich enough to casually drop 100,000 yen just for Hagakure's fortune-telling. There's also a mention that Junko and Mukuro's parents were able to take them on a trip to Europe, which suggests they were also pretty wealthy. Outside of corporations, there also exist very large gangs of organized criminals. 2 of the most prominent are the Crazy Diamonds, Japan's largest biker gang led by Mondo Owada, and the Kuzuryu clan, a Yakuza organization with over 30,000 members. Another one very important to the lore is Fenrir, an elite mercenary organization based out of the Middle East. Unlike other military contractors, they're said to engage directly on the front lines, each one with the prowess of an entire squadron of soldiers. Or at least they did, as the group ceased all activity at some point before THH, and it's believed they either imploded from internal tensions or they were neutralized to keep them from leaking the many state secrets they'd collected. Whatever the case, the only known member is Mukuro Ikusawa, who left her family during the aforementioned trip to Europe. And then there's the serial killers. The most famous is Genocider Sho, or Genocide Jack as they're called in the dub, a murderer who kills men using their specially made pairs of scissors, suspending their bodies with them and writing the word bloodlust, or bloodbath fever in the original Japanese, with a total body count of 37. A killer suspected by the police to have dissociative identity disorder, which turned out to be accurate, as the killer turned out to be an alter of Toko Fukawa. And as a brief aside, Danganronpa's portrayal of DID is one aspect that has not aged well at all. Can we stop giving every killer DID in everything? It's getting really old as a plot twist, it has very negative implications, and I'm tired of it. Another serial killer mentioned is Sparkling Justice, a Spanish vigilante who typically murders other criminals. Their MO is killing someone, then leaving behind a mask at the scene. Of course, while they claim to fight for justice, they were once interviewed by a magazine, and then later murdered the journalist who spoke with them. Crime as a whole seems to be a lot more severe in this world, even before the tragedy. A particularly serious case was the Gebura massacre, the product of Junko wanting to see if her sister's talent in killing was obsolete. So she had Mukuro go on a killing spree throughout the Gebura Junior High School, slaughtering all but 2 students who hid in a locker. So many crimes seem to have taken place and gone unsolved that HopeSpeak actually had a section of the library devoted to classified government documents and police reports on cold cases, quite likely in the hope that having Ultimates investigate them could help them find solutions. There even exists a group known as the Victims Catharsis Committee, a non-profit organization whose purpose is to offer victims of crime a chance at catharsis against those who've wronged them, which they do by setting up their own games called Duel Noirs, which can get very elaborate. But to counterbalance all this, there were also people on the side of justice. The most prominent was the Detective Library, a politically neutral organization created roughly 15 to 20 years before the events of the first game. With approximately 65,500 registered detectives, the DL brings together investigators with different specialties and levels of experience necessary when tackling what they classify as the 9 levels of crime. The public is given access to the help of these detectives whenever necessary, the most experienced and well-known being members of the Kirigiri family, from the library's founder Fujito Kirigiri to his granddaughter Kyoko. But even this group isn't free of stratification. The detectives themselves are also given ranks, with their number growing smaller the more crimes they solve and topics they master. Having a middle 0 in your rank makes you an expert in numerous fields. 0-0 means that they're at the top of their field and quite famous. A 0-0-0 is basically a living legend. And, in its entire existence, the library's only seen 4 detectives reach this rank. Now, let's take a moment and consider what the world outside Japan is like. While we know plenty of real-world countries exist, like Spain, Egypt, America, and France, there are also some fictional ones as well. Sonia Nevermind's homeland is a European micronation called Novoselic. According to her, while it's small enough that it's overlooked by many cartographers, it's a land with over 1,000 years of history, all under the protection and guidance of its royal family. They have a thriving economy, allowing their population to live relatively comfortable lives, but they also have some strange laws, such as it being customary to arrive 13 minutes before an arranged meeting. Anime is also very popular over there, and their specialties include chocolate and wine. It also has some unique wildlife, such as the makango, the skong, and the piranke. Sonia also expresses a lot of concern for the conservation of these creatures, which she hopes to improve once she becomes queen. However, while it's a relatively safe place, it's not immune to this world's same brand of chaos. Terrorist attacks and coup attempts have been made by insurgents many times in the past, and Sonia herself was abducted twice in her life. Despite the peace, courses in modern warfare are given in elementary school, meaning children in grade school can operate tanks. There's also Jabberwock Island, an archipelago somewhere in the Pacific, likely near the equator. With year-round summer weather, it was a popular resort destination, similar to places like Tahiti or Bora Bora. It would also play an unexpected role in the future of mankind. Killer Killer also mentions a place called the Republic of Lamatia, although we hardly know anything about that place. Finally, while it's never fully explored, Byakuya mentions that there's a secret council that controls the world from the shadows. While it may seem like a joke at first, he later says the Togami family is involved with them, and thus it's his duty to understand the world on all levels, which is how he can confirm the classified documents in Hope's Peak are the real deal. Whether this council is real is never clarified in the games themselves, but it's likely a reference to conspiracy theories about the Illuminati and real-world wealthy families like the Rothsteins. We never see what's in those documents, but according to Byakuya, there's enough in them for a commoner like Makoto to risk being disappeared if he reads them. The Danganronpa Togami series actually expands on this a little, although canonicity on this matter is unclear. There, they're called the Council of Global Controllers, consisting of 33 members, including Byakuya and Sonia, with their meetings always held at the Church of Bones in Prague. They've gone through multiple iterations, and it's believed that the group was centuries old. But rather than some malicious shadow government assassinating people, they're actually a benevolent organization that intervened in times of danger, or when the world needed guidance. So as we can see, Danganronpa's Japan is rife with social stratification, with a clear divide between commoners and ultimates, where the rich are absurdly powerful and crime is rampant enough that whole organizations need to be founded just to tackle it. Those who are in power, and those who are training to receive that power, are taught to look down on those different from them, to view talent and accomplishment of any kind as proof of their inherent superiority. The common people are also surrounded with hopeful messages from books, magazines, ads, shows, all encouraging them. But that encouragement could just as easily be seen as an extension of Hope's Peak's tentacles, trying to find new sources of talent to study. And it was because of these attitudes and this ongoing divide that it all came crashing down. Danganronpa offers us a very unique sort of apocalypse. It wasn't the result of a single event, but a chain of dominoes that had already been set up. All it took was one person to knock them over. That person being Junko Enoshima, and that first domino being the tragedy of Hope's Peak. With the deaths of the student council members and the reserve course in protest, this started a movement that spread all over the internet. A whole online community emerged based around it, which included not just students, but people of various races and nationalities. This marked the beginning of her actual plan, but Junko knew for a fact she couldn't pull this off alone. And she already had a group of ready and willing helpers, the troublemakers from Hope's Peak Elementary, children who were already so depressed and hopeless about their home lives that they were ready to end it all together. Well, all except for Monika, who thought the whole idea would have been a fun prank. But then Junko arrived and offered them another chance. Not only did she prove to them that they could stand up to adults, starting with the death of a random stranger they didn't even know, but she became a new point of obsession for Monika, and Monika had everything Junko needed. As chief executive of the robotics branch, Monika had free reign to do basically whatever she wanted, and so gave her father a cover story that she was building a new line of robots, ones meant to serve as domestic workers and for emergency rescue purposes. And Tokuichi and Haiji paid her no mind as she began mass-producing Junko an army of Monokumas. Meanwhile, in the world at large, the demonstrations quickly evolved from a student protest into uprisings against the rich, a movement that quickly spread globally, and many were optimistic that it would burn out quickly, but it didn't. As people took to the streets and began taking a stand for social issues, abnormalities began to show themselves. At some point, the motives and modus operandi shifted, where the only goal became violence. Strong people killed weak people killed the weakest among them, and the weak formed factions to lynch the strong. None of it took place all at once, though. This was all the product of a continual erosion of a stable society. As the media overflowed with reports of death and destruction, people eating their dinner as they watched, they became desensitized. Violence became the new norm, and death now became a certainty, especially as these killer robots started attacking people. All of this was the work of ultimate despair. Now, regardless of what you prefer as the origin of ultimate despair, whether you prefer DR2's explanation that Junko manipulated their weaknesses and fears, or DR3's that they were literally brainwashed with a video, the end result was ultimately still the same. They were a cult of personality devoted to Junko and her ideology of despair. Their devotion to her went beyond adherence and into single-minded obsession, physical mutilation, and, after her death in the first game, replacing parts of their bodies with those from her corpse. And their goal was, quite simply, the destruction of society, the erosion of humanity's hope, with no way to bargain or reason with them otherwise. They instigated terror attacks, overthrew governments, wrote programming spreading horrifying messages and imagery. Their influence spread from the highest levels of government all the way down to legions of ordinary people. In this time, the world was consumed by war. Not war driven for ideals, religion, or profit, but purely war for the sake of destruction, with the promise that as long as this organization existed, the tragedy would never end. Even the atmosphere became horribly polluted, turning the sky across the world a deep shade of red. But some places managed to exist as safe havens, one of them being Towa City, thanks to its isolation. They were able to play themselves up as saviors, but once Tokuichi and Haiji learned about the Monokumas, Monika threatened them, and then encouraged them to pursue a new business model, build weapons and tools to help both sides in the tragedy. So, valuing their company's reputation above all else, they agreed. Another safe haven turned out to be where all this started, Hope's Peak Academy's old school building. It was here, during the second year of Class 78, that they and the headmaster, Jin Kirigiri, agreed to create a shelter to weather the storm. They would seal themselves in, potentially for the rest of their lives, to help keep some semblance of hope alive. But of course, this was all part of Junko's plan as well. With her proof of concept complete, the goal was to force her closest friends to kill each other on a global broadcast, as part of one final message that hope would always crumble in the face of overwhelming despair. That is what began the killing school life. or as we know it, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. Now, I want to pause briefly, because I feel this aspect gets overlooked quite a bit. Junko is often presented as this absurdly intelligent master manipulator, able to turn the world to this chaotic mess single-handedly, and for no real motivation other than because she can. But if that were true, why would the predominant emotion she focuses on and obsesses over be despair? To feel despair means to feel pain, heartbreak, distress, unhappiness, etc. The people she chose to kill, from Class 78 to her childhood friend Matsuda, to her own sister, all of them were people that she says she genuinely loved and cared about. These were acts that hurt her too, and that's why she did them. This is something I don't recall seeing anyone else discuss, at least not in depth. And it's kind of a horrifyingly fascinating idea that Junko chose to destroy the world not out of boredom, nihilism, or hatred, but out of genuine love. That she was so enamored with the idea of despair, got such a high from experiencing it, that she wanted to take it to the greatest possible extreme. Which suggests that Junko, on some level, was a highly compassionate and outwardly focused person. She wasn't just some crazed murderer or sadist. The only way she could feel true despair, as she puts it, would be if she actually regretted everything she ever did. But instead of stopping, she doubled down and escalated. To me at least, that's a horrifying idea. This isn't me suggesting she had good intentions when she manipulated these events into happening. It's just the idea that, as a villain, her motivation has more in line with unconditional love than what people often attribute to her. An unconditional love that fostered the most destructive event the world had ever seen. But of course, as we know, her plan backfired. The killing school life instead showcased the strength and character of the survivors, and helped to foster a new wave of hope and efforts to bring the tragedy to an end. That led to them meeting up with and joining the Future Foundation. Founded by former alumni and staff of Hope's Peak, Future Foundation's goal is to defeat ultimate despair and rebuild the world, an organization based out of what would have been Hope's Peak's overseas campus. While it's unclear when or where they began, they rose to prominence after the Killing Game, and were able to start turning the tide. The entire organization was also divided into various branches, each one devoted to a particular aspect of rebuilding the world. While devoted to this cause and putting an end to crimes, they were also willing to recruit murderers. This included Toko, who was at least considered an intern if she swore not to kill another person, and Takumi Hajirihara, one of the only survivors of the Gabura massacre, who had developed a fixation on murders and who had now taken on the identity of Killer Killer. He was recruited into a division of the 6th branch, known as the Special Crimes Investigation Unit, who specialize in bizarre murders, including cannibalism, rituals, jigsaw murders, or anything otherwise out of the ordinary. The exact sorts of crimes that became common during the tragedy. But even then, many people distrusted Future Foundation, probably due to the aforementioned history of the organizations exploiting them. In fact, Toa Group actively produced propaganda during this time, claiming the Foundation instigated the tragedy as part of a conspiracy to seize power. Nevertheless, without Junko, Ultimate Despair's forces were left to their own devices, and within just about 18 months, most were either dead or captured. Of course, others struck back in their own ways. Monica in particular wanted to create a second Junko by plunging Toa City into chaos, hoping to force resident normal girl Kamaru Naegi, younger sister of Makoto, into an impossible choice and thus break her spirit. But what she didn't count on was Toko coming to care for Kamaru as a friend. And Kamaru, while she'd spent most of the game wanting to escape the city, eventually decided to try and save everyone. The result was an uneasy peace between the two sides, with Kamaru and Toko helping to cement Future Foundation's role in the city. Unfortunately, even the Foundation wasn't immune to infighting. Many of the branch heads were prone to letting their old grievances and ideological differences divide them on a number of issues. Most of them felt that the only way to end the tragedy was the total eradication of ultimate despair, and considered those who disagreed either traitors or moles. Others, like Makoto, believed maybe it was possible to save them, utilizing some key pieces of technology at their disposal, a move that would ensure they wouldn't have to resort to violence. And there were definitely other noble members within the organization, but some believed that the only way to end the tragedy and prevent anything like it from happening again would be to force the world to accept hope. This is what leads to the events of Danganronpa 3 Future Side. The greatest irony was, in a way, Toa Group was right. A member of Ultimate Despair was actually a major leader within the Future Foundation, that being Class 77's former teacher, Shisa Yukizome. But she had no role in the game's creation. She was simply there to encourage this lack of cohesion. And in the end, while Future Foundation's leadership was mostly wiped out, the organization carried on. The tragedy came to an end, and the world was rebuilt. And to address the elephant in the room, yes, Makoto made the decision to rebuild Hope's Peak Academy, a move that I and many others deeply disagreed with. However, I will make my case for how I've sort of come around to this idea at the end. So now that we've covered the big stuff, let's talk about some smaller but still important details, starting with Danganronpa is a series that gradually became more and more sci-fi as it went on, and it's fair to attribute this to the existence of Ultimates. While the first game was fairly grounded, the biggest example of technical development is with robots and artificial intelligence, such as with Monokuma. As discussed in Chihiro's free time events, there's a distinction between weak AI and strong AI. Weak AI is really only used for problem solving, and while it can execute tasks, it has no conscious awareness. That's what a strong AI is, one that emulates human consciousness. In the world of Danganronpa, this has already progressed much further than in our own world. Chihiro had managed to successfully create a strong AI named Alter Ego, who replicates their image and personality, but has its own awareness and, for lack of a better term, identity. However, Monokuma initially qualifies as neither, being remotely controlled by Junko from behind the scenes. However, she did use Alter Ego as a springboard and managed to create two Alter Ego versions of herself, which stayed in Towa City under the names Shirokuma and Kurokuma, and were later utilized by Izuru and the former Class 77 as part of their own gambit. The remaining Monokumas, as seen in Ultra Despair Girls, qualify as weak AI, where their only goal is to cause as much mayhem as possible. Some Monokumas were even built to be the size of buildings. Another aspect is cybernetics. While it's not explored in depth, there are things like Nagito's prosthetic arm, which he received after the Junko one he attached was removed. In DR Tagami, Byakuya's older sister, Shinobu, is also said to have a prosthetic arm and a cybernetic eye. I would include Mechamaru as well, although that transformation technically didn't happen. Still, while the cast is initially confused, they quickly accept that he's become a cyborg, which implies this sort of technology is unusual, but not unheard of. Other technologies produced here include the air purifiers, which help protect small areas from pollution. There's also the megaphone hacking gun, which fires programming codes using bursts of electromagnetic radiation, allowing users to hack any given target. Another major aspect of this series is the concept of memory manipulation. Based primarily on the work of Yasuke Matsuda, the ultimate neurologist, enough of a map of the human brain had been established to remove specific memories. And I mean very specific, as in an exact stretch of time or a specific person. This would prove to be a vital aspect of the Killing Games, as well as the most important piece of tech for this entire saga, the Neo World program. Now, the Neo World program has a lot of confusion behind it, but I'll explain. This idea actually had its origins in Hope's Peak, with research from people like the Ultimate Programmer, Ultimate Neurologist, and Ultimate Therapist. We know who these three people are, but this doesn't mean that Chihiro and Matsuda directly worked on it. It just means that their work helped to contribute to its creation. The idea behind the program is virtual reality psychotherapy, designed to remove and replace the memories of its occupants. The concept is that by targeting a specific memory from a specific period of time, the trauma associated with that memory could be removed. This would then be replaced by whatever environment one experienced within the program, whether it's a beach or whatever other scenario they prefer. When a person is placed into the program, their body enters a sleep-like state. Their consciousness is then removed from their body and placed into a digital avatar, one constructed from those specific memories of the user. So if you were trying to remove a memory from 10 years ago, you would look 10 years younger in the simulation. But while it could be helpful, the Neo World program also carries a serious risk if abused. The avatars are not directly tied to the occupants, and have to be directly re-uploaded to their minds before they can be awakened. Should an avatar be lost or deleted in some manner, there's no recovery. An occupant could be rendered comatose, or potentially suffer brain death as a result. This is why the program came equipped with observers, who were there to monitor everything and ensure the occupants would be safe. It's a little convoluted, but that's the explanation. And Makoto's goal with this was to remove the memories of Class 77's time at Hope's Peak, in the hope that maybe it would allow them to return to their old selves. The Neo World program was so effective, it even reconstructed Hajime's old personality, allowing him to be restored from the deepest recesses of Izuru's mind. But this also led to Ultimate Despair's backup plan. After allowing themselves to be captured, Izuru used the alter ego Junko and planted it into the program, with the goal of corrupting it, allowing them all to be killed so that multiple copies of her avatar could be uploaded into their bodies. And this, ultimately, was Junko's last bid at continuing the tragedy. But the Neo World program also had a backup, a forced shutdown sequence, which would cancel the memory overwrite, but allow any remaining avatars to be uploaded back to their bodies. But possibly due to the instability of the program during the end of the game, Hajime and his fellow survivors were able to retain their memories of both before and during their time in it. And then there is quite possibly the most controversial inclusion in the entire series, the brainwashing anime. To summarize, this was the creation of ultimate animator Ryota Mitarai, something he devoted so much work to that he nearly starved to death. The idea behind this one is, through a combination of bright shifting colors and visuals, the video would allow the animator to influence the viewer's state of mind. Junko then took this idea and, through some alterations in combination with the tragedy of Hope's Peak, created a video that would drive anyone who viewed it into despair. Now, to be clear, this idea didn't begin with DR3. Equally controversial was the K2K system described in Danganronpa Togami, aka the Despair novel. Much of this comes down to Danganronpa's tendency for meta jokes and commentary with whatever medium it's in. But these two share the same idea, a piece of media that would directly force the viewer toward the behaviors that the despairs would want. A second version of this would later be called the Hope video, which would not only strip away all of humanity's negative emotions, but leave them susceptible to orders given by the creator. And while it's not explicitly stated, it's implied that just half an hour of exposure would cause these effects permanently. Now that we've covered the overall world and technology, let's take a brief look at some of the weirdest aspects of the Danganronpa universe. Starting with a very prominent recurring element, the idea of luck as a talent. While Hope's Peak did have an annual drawing for the ultimate lucky student, the steering committee didn't actually view luck as a real talent, while Jin did, and was deeply fascinated by the idea. As explained in Makoto Naegi's Worst Day Ever, Makoto wasn't actually the initial one chosen. An unnamed girl was selected, but after a convoluted series of events where Makoto wound up as part of a bus jacking and a crashed mail carrier, that acceptance letter was burned and a second drawing was held. Which, depending on your perspective, means our unnamed winner was actually the luckier of the two, or Makoto's luck ensured he would be in the right place at the right time when the world needed him. Celestia believes that all humans are programmed with either good luck or bad luck from the moment of their conception. She even compares this to fate and believes this is how she excels at gambling. The best example of luck in the series, though, is Nagito Kamaida. From his childhood, he's been plagued with a continuous cycle of good and bad luck. Among other things, he was involved in a plane hijacking while on vacation, only for a meteor the size of a fist to hit the plane and kill the hijacker. His parents were killed in the event, but he was granted their fortune. In middle school, he was kidnapped by a murderer, stuffed in a trash bag and held for ransom. He was let go when nobody came to pay, and it was in the bag he found a winning lottery ticket. He was later diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma and frontotemporal dementia, with a life expectancy of less than a year, but then received an acceptance letter from Hope's Peak. And those are just the things he mentions. Even Izuru in Despairside claims to have good luck even stronger than Nagito's, although his is still potent enough to protect him from getting shot in the heart. So luck is very much a tangible force in the Danganronpa universe, but whether this is comparable to, say, Larry Niven's Known Space series, where luck is literally a genetic trait that one can breed for, is unclear. Another bizarre phenomenon in this world is ghosts. See, Kamaru makes it clear in one of her conversations with Toko that ever since she was a child, she's had the ability to see and talk to ghosts. Toko writes this one off, until she's literally possessed by the spirit of Tokuichi Toa, who delivers important information about Monica, which cements the idea that ghosts are real. Hagakure's fortune-telling skills are only accurate 30% of the time, but when they are, they're actually fairly accurate. In one of his readings with Makoto, he accurately predicts the details of the first game's bad ending. The Freemasons exist and Sonia has a vested interest in learning more about them. Monica rigged a truck to fly into space, so she could become a space NEET. And as far as the ending of DR3 is concerned, she's still up there. Reddit user Another Stats Guy calculated that Leon, despite not caring about baseball and never training a day in his life, could pitch a ball at 160 kilometers per hour, or just shy of 100 miles per hour. This kid has the ability to throw a baseball within the top 0.000102% of all major league pitches. The Afterlife, or Afterlife Theater as it's often called, is a movie theater in which the dead characters watch what's going on in the world of the living. Whether this is literal or meant to be metaphorical is never made clear, but it confirms that not only are there ghosts, but there is an afterlife in this universe. Kirigiri So features creatures known as the hybrids, which are made from the merging of human and plant DNA by an unknown scientist. Naturally, these were made using the DNA taken from Ultimate students, leading to one of them being named Kyoka, who's an exact duplicate of Kyoko, but in a white dress and without burned hands. Despite the fact that they eat humans, and tend to be very antagonistic, Kyoka is still capable of compassion, and her goal is to take care of the hybrids who couldn't be like her. Also, they're aliens. Yeah. In Chapter 4 of THH, Hagakure says that he had a burger stolen and disassembled by a flying saucer, which he believes was indication that the fast food company's patties weren't really 100% beef as they claimed. There's also an additional route in Kirigiri So, where the mansion home to Kyoka and the plant hybrids is actually the starting point for an invasion by a species known as the Rhinogradentia. This is actually a reference to a German speculative biology book from 1961, which details a fictional order of mammals called the rhinogrades, all of whom developed highly evolved organs from their noses. Their inclusion here may be due to the fact that, in the book, it said that the rhino grades were native to a Pacific archipelago called Haiyi, which was destroyed in the 50s by American nuclear testing. Danganronpa reimagines them as a Type 3 alien civilization bent on invading Earth. Now, while this route is not canon, I couldn't not include it in all this. Danganronpa is a huge series, and there's so much else I could cover, but this video had to end sometime. This was just my look at the world as a whole, and the details most analyses seem to skirt past. With all this in mind, I'd like to conclude on an observation, one that I hope future writers in this and other fandoms will keep in mind going forward. You've seen how dark and twisted the universe of Danganronpa can be, but I feel that focusing strictly on things like death orders, executions, and how to make every murder as disturbing and elaborate as possible, all of that misses the real point of the series, because the consistent theme here is that people are worth more than just their talents, more than just what they can contribute to society. People sometimes crack under pressure and do things they regret, but they feel it's the only way to move forward. Rather than strictly being mad at them, we should also be mad at the people who forced them into that situation in the first place. Whether it's a school that pressures students into always succeeding, a corporate environment that encourages us to see our coworkers as enemies and customers as resources, or a killing game that encourages mistrust and deception. There's this annoyingly common idea that people are inherently selfish by nature, that cruelty and evil are the norm, and that society is the only thing keeping us in check, that kindness and compassion are a facade, and it's only when their backs are against the wall that people show you who they really are. This is total nonsense. People don't show you who they really are when their life is on the line. They revert to basic survival instincts. Quite the opposite, they show you who they really are when they're at their most comfortable and secure. And Danganronpa actually shows this, not just with the fact that the overwhelming majority of the Blackens are remorseful. When they were attending school, the groups were genuine friends. In Class 78, they were close enough that people like Toko, Chihiro, Celeste, and Mondo felt safe enough to reveal their secrets to everyone. When Byakuya doubted the very idea of friendship, that nobody would ever sacrifice their life for another, and that we're all in it for ourselves, it nearly got him and everyone else killed. As Kyoko says, people don't act according to calculations and cost-benefit strategies, but raw, often irrational feelings. Sometimes those feelings manifest in a bad way, like with Sayaka. She had spent so long building up her position as an idol, doing things she wasn't proud of, and when that dream seemed to be over, she couldn't take it. But while it's easy to assign blame to her for trying to kill Leon and frame Makoto, even Monokuma says the idol industry is a cutthroat business. Kyoko even suggested to Makoto that while Sayaka did all that, she also tried to save him by writing Leon's name. And Makoto doesn't hold a grudge. He doesn't judge her or look down on her for betraying him. She carries on her name for the entire series, and even feels guilty he couldn't save her or the others. There's a lot of people out there who don't like Makoto, and that's fine. You're allowed to dislike things. But where I disagree is the idea that he's boring, uninteresting, or even unrealistic. That no one in that situation would be that nice. To that, I have to ask, what about that is unrealistic to you? Why is it that you find someone who's capable of overwhelming kindness and forgiveness, even after constant heartbreak, less believable than a talking robot bear? Makoto had spent the game being mocked, ridiculed, joked at for being normal, and even Byakuya said someone like him would never be in a position to change the world. Yet in the end, he beat Junko not because he was talented all along, but because he held on to his belief and hope. A belief that, even after years of enduring the tragedy and his own survivor's guilt, never went away. Hajime was so ashamed and so insecure of being a normal person that he was willing to completely erase his own identity to become someone new. But he didn't escape the simulation by being more talented or skilled than the others, but because he chose to face the future, and whatever good or bad it might bring. Because the future is something they would shape themselves. Komaru felt powerless and terrified because she was just a normal girl in a horrifying situation. But not only did she realize she couldn't keep using that as an excuse, her friendship with Toko brought her out of the darkest revelation of her life, and gave Toko a new perspective on life as well. And in the end, she chose to stay and make things better for everyone in Toa City, not out of any kind of obligation, but because she wanted to. And then there's the many, many examples of people whose talents were not a product of innate genius or skill, but perseverance and growth, of interest in a cause or a particular skill, who started off as pretty normal themselves. The consistent theme is that talent is not the same as value. It's the most ordinary people in these casts who prove themselves to be the most important movers and shakers. Not in isolation, but because they form genuine friendships and connections that encourage them to keep moving forward. That, I believe, is the story's ultimate message about hope. It's so easy to joke about how much the words hope and despair get thrown around, but there's something else that I feel gets overlooked by everyone. How is it that our protagonists win? Simple, when they stop playing by someone else's rules. Especially unfair, arbitrary rules that dictate who wins and who loses. They throw off the enforced idea that only certain people get to benefit, that only some people get to be saved, and instead decide, no, we've had enough of this. It's throwing off the arbitrary idea enforced by those in power that there always have to be winners and losers, that what they value isn't winning, but saving the people they've come to care about. I bring this up for two major reasons. For one, I've seen a lot of people in the fandom, especially other fangans, who seem to want to emphasize the darker aspects of this series. Make the characters meaner and more morally ambiguous, add more drama, make the murders and executions more brutal, and even some who want the villains to win for once. By making this video, I hope I managed to convince some of you that that's really not what Danganronpa is about. This is not a grimdark series. It's a weird and quirky one that, while it's nowhere near perfect, still has a lot to say. And what it has to say about the importance of valuing interpersonal connections and friendships, rather than judging the world based on talent, money, or status, or learning not to play someone else's games or live by their bullshit rules, and the importance of seeing the good in people in even the worst situations. Those are always important ideas to keep in mind for the future, and no matter how much tragedy or hope the future brings, it's something you and I have the power to shape for ourselves. Even the most ordinary people in the world have the power to change the course of history. Thank you for watching. Hey there! If you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm assuming you did, maybe consider leaving a like, subscribing, all that good stuff. This series really means a lot to me, and I hope I managed to do it justice. And maybe opened up some new details that you didn't know about before. Is there any other Danganronpa detail you'd like me to cover? Maybe another topic or series you'd like me to explore in depth? Please let me know in the comments. Until next time, I'm CmndrBubbles, reminding you to be kind to yourselves and others.